you so much, Brother Yusuf, for this introduction and for hosting this webinar. Actually, I would like to confirm that I add my voice to you for supporting your brother Sulaiman and supporting all this kind of injustice which happened to your brother, to my son, because especially mental illness people, they are weak, vulnerable, they don't have voice, and we are the one who defend them. We are the one who pass their voice, their pain, the injustice happened to them, to the people who concern about it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will inshallah stand and support us bi'idhnillah. I want also to thank everybody sharing today this webinar and joining us today, for taking the time to hear my son's story, which is one of the top human rights cases in Canada. Our story in brief: we are a Canadian family who came over 20 years ago in search for a better future for our two children, like any Canadian family landing on this land. My son Abdulrahman is known by his family and friends of his gentle soul and loving person. Abdulrahman had many dreams like any other youth. One of his big dreams is wanted to grow up to be an engineer. When he turned 14, he began to experience mental health issues. Some of these symptoms including depression, racing thoughts, troubling sleeping, and excessive energy. Unfortunately, this mood instability resulted in a substance abuse and suicidal thoughts. As a kid-loving family, we all were very concerned about this. And imagine, for 3 years, we took him from one hospital to the other in 3 different countries, including Canada, trying to help him overcome his addiction and understanding where his symptoms were coming from. Finally, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and obsessive disorder. Also, he has something called looping. When Abdulrahman's brain circles back to an idea over and over again, and that idea becomes very rewarding and gratificating for him, and it fills a part of his cognitive functioning, his thinking. So after that, we were so excited as he was finally placed on the right medication, and we were able to manage his mood swings. After that, he became more social, loved interacting with people, but unfortunately the medication was causing him to gain weight, and he was always drowsy. At this point now, he was 17. But under medication, he went back to school. As a teenager, he faced a lot of abuse and bullying from his friends because of his weight gain. So he kept taking medication because he was so happy that he has a stable mood swing. But he did a very restrictive diet to lose weight. He ate only 1 meal a day. But the breaking point was when students in his class made fun of him when he slept in the classroom, saying the medication made him sleepy. He really felt so disappointed and refused to take the medicine until a better one was prescribed to him. We understand his disappointment, and we placed him on a waiting list at CAMH for a review of his medication. At this point, he spent a lot of time in his room doing online chatting or games. We were okay with this, and we were less worried about this because he was staying away from drugs, and that made him busy of having these suicidal thoughts. But on the other hand, we chose to hire a private physician for help and found appointment after 2 days of his arrest. Now at this point, he had just turned 18, and we needed to cheer him up before meeting the psychologists. So we decided to go in a family vacation to the United States. In our trip to United States, we crossed the border without any issues. As soon as we arrived our hotel in New Jersey, after like 9 or 10 hours driving, we were surrounded by FBI agents. At the beginning, I thought they are gangs kidnapping kids. So I ran to them crying, "Who are you? Why you take my son? Why you take my sick son?" And I hug my son and I want to grab him from their hands. They told us we were a good family, but they need to question my son for chatting online. In a glance, he was gone with them in a big, huge black car. They left us in the darkest street, confused, scared, so worried about our sick son who never slept over away of his family. I want you to just 1 second think about the feeling of us in this moment. 1 second now. Just think about the feeling for me as a mother, for his dad. And we know our son is sick at this moment. Next day, we were astonished that he was in court and charged with 7 charges of conspiracy and shipping material. We were shocked. How come my son with mental illness, who was isolated in his room, have been involved in such accusations? He has no violent or criminal past. He was so quiet boy. Through the trial, we began to understand what had happened. At some point, his teacher assigned the class a research project about Islamic Caliphate, and Abdulrahman started to research the topic on his laptop. He spent hours and hours and days doing this project. His hoping symptoms from his mental health took over. And he wasn't under medication at this time. He eventually found himself on websites and chats with people expressing extremist views against the West, especially the United States. This is where all started. He was targeted by an FBI undercover agent. And of course, Abdulrahman's mental illness made him an easy target for entrapment. And the more sad thing, that the both agencies, the FBI and the RCMP, were aware about his mental illness, because later on we found out that the RCMP had unlawfully accessed my son's Cambridge file and provided it to the FBI before our traveling. You cannot imagine how in some chatting records the agents used all kind of emotional influence to engage Abdulrahman in radical discussions, such as the mistreatment of Muslims by the United States, and drag him into hyper chatting, like videos about the US killing innocent people. And by the way, those chats have been published on global news titled "Undercover, the Informant Encouraged the Vulnerable Canadian." And the FBI, because the FBI needed Abdulrahman to take one action, so they can charge him, they got Abdulrahman to order from online to online, cleaning chemicals and Christmas lights. This kind of cruel and lawful entrapment is confirmed by Abdulrahman's lawyer Dennis Edney, Andrew Fresh, and many other criminal lawyers. It is also one of the big concerns for Human Rights Watch and journalists, investigators like Trevor Aroniston have written about this common, cruel, inhuman entrapment in his book, Terror Factor, Inside the FBI's Manufactured War in Terrorism. Moreover, the Canadian Supreme Court ruled against the RCMP and determined this kind of inhuman entrapment to be illegal, as seen in BC case. This kind of violations is repeated by the RCMP and it destroyed many families. Some of them wrote many books like Dr. Monia, Hope and Despair. The story didn't finish here. There were many violations to Abdulrahman's rights. Abdulrahman's case was immediately sealed, which didn't allow us to get any help or interference from outside. They placed They placed a federal defender to represent Abdulrahman, who warned us against speaking to anyone, even the Canadian embassy or government or any Canadian lawyers. His detention was harsh with abusive conditions, including solitary confinement and severe restrictions in communicating with us. He also didn't receive the proper medical and mental health treatment he requires, as the American prison don't offer such medication and services, despite his many attempting to suicide in the prison. My son was so scared. My son was so scared, vulnerable. He was isolated in solitary confinement. And he was taken advantage of. And his federal defender convinced him to plead guilty because it would get him out of solitary confinement, and thus was better for him. Without informing us, she took him to the court, and it was done. The boy pleaded guilty. Later on in prison, he heard in the prison that his federal defender was known to work closely with the FBI. Even though Abdulrahman wanted another lawyer, guess what? The court wouldn't let him change the federal defender. The court wouldn't let him change the federal defender. And as a result of all this mess, Abdulrahman, the mental illness boy, who was entrapped by FBI and RCMP knowingly that he was sick, was sentenced to 40 years. 40 years in prison. Of course, this excessive sentence didn't take into account his age, mental health, and mitigating factors that doctors testified at sentencing. "40 years in prison." We are now a family living with broken heart. It is very difficult for us as parents for a boy with mental illness who was arrested this unfair way. And at the same time, we need to work. We cannot just, if I'm a mother, if I'm an only mother, I cannot talk to you now. I cannot talk to you now. I cannot talk to you now. Maybe I sit on the corner and cry, but talk? No, but why I'm talking? I'm talking to protect my sick victim son. I'm talking to protect our youth I am talking to protect Canada's future. We put an active complaint against the RCMP with the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency, by the way. And we have started a campaign to raise awareness about our son's story and to ultimately bring Abdulrahman back to Canada. And to make you aware of what may happen to your son. Think about it. Does anybody knows his son or daughter doing on the internet? Does anybody knows that? So when you go any trip, anywhere, you just arrest your son or daughter because they were doing chatting on the internet, especially if they are mentally ill? But bury them alive in prison, bury them alive in prison, and they know they are mental illness? I consider this a criminal, a crime against our youth from the FBI and the RCP. And we need to stand and stop this. We need our government, Canada, to stand and say no.
Yes, I agree.
Get the good people in the RCMP and to stand and say no. We are the only supporter to my sick son. We go and visit him when visitors are allowed. It takes us 13 hours each way to visit him, sometimes 20 hours. And according to the prison location, sometimes he's so far, we take the airplane if we have the money. When we visit him, we find him shackled in chains and we speak to him behind the glass wall. We are not even allowed to hug or kiss our mental illness boy. The US prison environment is extremely harsh, especially for a young boy with mental disorder, and my son attempted suicide many times in prison. This tough environment is a threat again for my son's life. We need to bring Abdulrahman back to Canada. My son is tortured mentally and physically. Also, US prison doesn't have the mental and medical treatment care that needs, as the US prison priority is few US citizen. This is confirmed, by the way, and testified by Dr. Amir Ataran from University of Ottawa in the trial. Abdulrahman needs to be supported by his loving family and caring family in a system that provides him with the medical treatment he needs. This is the reason, guys, we are here in Canada for our kids. How come that happened to our kids in this land? My son's transfer is allowed under the International Transfer of Offenders Act. If only Canada intervenes and fight for his return. And you know what? We expect nothing less from Canada, the country that defends human rights around the world. Canada, our government. How about Canadians? How about mental illness youth Canadians?
Absolutely.
Want and need, I'm sorry, Fakri, I have only few. I need to finish this. We need our son back. Canada is responsible to bring him back home and to prevent Abdulrahman's same situation from happening to other Canadians. Abdulrahman's safety is about our kids' safety and future. This human rights case should be a concern for the Canadian government, media, and all Canadians. And we urge Canadian government and public to help us. We need your help. Please bring Abdulrahman home. Please help us to bring Abdulrahman home. Abdulrahman's safety is our youth safety, is our safety for Canada's future. Thank you for taking time to listen.